Hey everyone, welcome back. Now, system design. It's the most dreaded interview round for any product based company. And the main problem with system design is even if you prepare a lot, there is no guarantee that you'll be able to crack the interview because we have got only 45 minutes to be able to design a very large system. And the reason why many of the candidates fail to crack the system design interview round is that they are not able to manage their time, and within that 45 minutes they are not able to actually give all the required information. Usually they get stuck in one or the two sections and they are not able to cover all of the sections that are important in order to make it a successful system design round, so as to be able to convey your design skills to the interviewer on the other side, right? So this video is about a template. I have prepared a basic template for the design interview round, which would walk you through how you need to divide your 45 to 50 minutes of the system design interview and how you need to walk through your skills and walk through the entire system design of the application of whichever question it has been given to you. So to begin with, system design round is not like a normal Q&A kind of a round or a coding round where you are given one question and you need to find the solution for it. So the most interesting part of system design interview round is that the interview would ask you a very simple a one line question, and you have to keep on speaking for 45 minutes on that one line of question. And it's mostly about you, how you'll be driving the entire 45 minutes of your round in order to answer the uh, complete solution that you have thought of in designing the system that the interviewer is asking. So it's not also about just providing a solution. It consists of multiple parts where you also have to ask questions, you have to clarify things, you have to limit the scope yourself, you have to convey your thought process to the interviewer again and again in the interview round, so that you're able to take your interview round into the correct direction and be able to communicate everything, so that uh, you don't feel unsatisfied that you didn't do good in the interview round. Rest depends what happens. The results cannot always be predicted. So to start with the template, let's assume the interviewer asks you a question: design WhatsApp or design any other chat messenger. So the basic interview, the system design interview, is divided into four parts. Basically, you can say four steps. So the first step when you are setting for a system design interview round and you have been asked a question is, so the first step is requirement gathering. Requirement gathering means it's all about asking questions, but asking the right questions, and asking the questions is just not to say to the just not to impress the interviewer to ask questions, but to come to conclusions. So you have to ask the right set of questions in the right set of amount in the right set of time, so that you are able to decide the direction of the next part of your system design interview round, right? So the requirements itself are of two types. One is the functional requirements, and the second is the non-functional requirements. So if you go to the internet, you'll be able to see a lot of information around functional requirements. But for non-functional requirements, usually they only say availability, scalability, reliability. These are the only three parameters that most of the content on over the internet talks about in terms of the non-functional requirements for a system design. But actually, functional requirements and non-functional requirements both are very critical in a system design interview. Functional requirements make you a good, like, if you're able to list down all the functional requirement, it means you are an engineer. But if you are able to list down all the non-functional requirements of the system design, that means you're a very good engineer, you're a great engineer. So that is how the interviewer differentiates you from the other candidates. And you need to design how to incorporate these non-functional requirements well into your system design. So quickly, let's walk through the basic functional requirements, and then we'll spend some time in understanding what the non-functional requirements are and how we need to talk about them. So functional requirements, for a chat messenger, the functional requirements can be like if you need a one-on-one chat or group chats. Do we support only text messages or some media? Do we need to introduce read receipts, online status, last seen timestamps, any audio calls, video calls? These are just like functionalities. Do we need to introduce broadcasting, status updates, user information, any display pic changing options, the devices on which? So this is one very critical functional requirement that you must talk about, and it's not just for chat messenger app system design. This mostly fits into almost all kind of system design questions that we get asked. So multiple devices is a good question, good functional requirement that you need to ask. And then there can be other any specific questions that you might get into mind, eh, that may pop up into your mind, and other questions like any other type of media that we need to support for sharing across the chat messages. So these were functional requirements. All in all, just spend 5 to 10 or 5 to 7 minutes over this part. Don't take more than that, and don't take less than that, because you need to establish some scope for the next part of the system design out. And also, while you may be listing down all of the features, but the interviewer would not expect you to be able to design everything in a 45 minutes round. So you need to scope it out. You need to categorize these things, like maybe chat features would be in one section, user profile and other features would be in a different section, media type, sharing of documents, that would be a different section. So these are the kind of sections you'll have to define, and you'll have to ask the interviewer, and you'll have to come in agreement with the interviewer that, do you want me to talk about this, or do you want me to talk about this? Most of the cases, interviewer would tell you to design only a part of the application. So that is where you define the scope. But that is the question you need to ask. Don't just list on all the functional requirements and then run on each of the features and start talking about it. No, just list down and then ask. Now let's move to non-functional requirements. These are very important, and these would uh, be your this would give you the chance to actually be able to showcase your system design skills. Because non-functional requirements are like, how many daily active users would be there on our application, what would be the monthly traffic, how many parallel requests we can have on our chat messenger at a time, how many messages per day we need to exchange over the application. Messages per day would give you an idea of how much storage we would be needing. Then maximum characters in a text message. Some people can categorize it in functional requirements also, but this would actually fall into non-functional requirements, because this would help you decide the storage. This is not kind of a feature, this is like a storage. This is something that you'll use to, like, if you are able to decide the maximum character in a text message, and you know the maximum number of messages that are going to be sent in a day, with this you'll be able to identify that this much MB or this much GB of data would be used in a day by our application. That is how you define the this non-functional requirement of storage for your application. The next part would be latency. So what is the expected time, which is how performant our application needs to be, how much time should one message take from between our sending and their receiving. So these kind of questions. Maximum size of a group. Now the maximum size of a group would also give you an idea of how much information, how much storage you would be needing for, like, if you are designing a mobile application, so how much maximum storage, there could be some local storage that we might have, and how much user information we might need to be saving, all of that. Maximum size of media files, these are like all constraints that we need to ask, so that we have an idea uh, about how much performant and how much load and how much scale our application is expected to have. Now, the read write ratio, this is a very important thing to ask, because based on this, you might need to design your databases, like which type of database you need and how would you be sharding the databases. So, read write ratio, the traffic, these are like very important. Consistency versus availability, this is a very important thing to know about, because If you've read about, if you prepared for system design interview round, then you definitely know about CAP theorem. I'll create a separate video in detail on CAP theorem, but this is a very important topic. Do read about it and do talk about it, and based on your application, decide whether it would be eventually consistent eventually, or it would be favoring availability. So that was the non-functional requirements. For non-functional requirements also just take like 5 to 10 minutes, not more than that and not less than that also. So in 10 to 15 minutes you should have a clear idea what you're expected to design in your system design round, and that is how you'll be driving the next 20 to 25 minutes for your uh, interview round. And by this section you should be able to decide, you should be able to make decisions about what back of the envelope estimations are. So back of the envelope estimations is like a concept that is used in system design for calculating the storage, the active daily users, the traffic, the request. So that is a separate topic in itself. So with these requirement gathering, you'll be able to calculate, make all of these estimates. Then you'll also have the idea about how much resources you need, the scale, the number of servers, whether you be needing a cache, how much cache, which all regions you might be targeting, and so on. Then the latency requirements, because if you talk about the non-functional requirements, you'll also know how much performant, whether you need to use, because if you have a very small number of seconds, like if you have to be very fast, you might need to use no SQL. If you can expect some delay, then you might choose SQL databases also, and so on. Some constraints also you'll be able to understand. So that is about the requirements gathering. Now the next section is the API design. The first step was requirement gathering, and if you are in most of the interviews that you would be asked, they would always involve an API, because they won't be asking you to design a desktop application or some IDE or some command uh, like a shell or something. Usually, because in system design interview, they need to test your knowledge of distributed networks, microservices, and so on. So they would ask you a system in which you there would be some sort of API involved. If there is internet involved, there would be an API involved. So in step two, you need to talk about API design. Usually, what candidates do is they either spend a lot of time talking about API designs, or they don't talk about it at all. They just add a one liner, they mention the endpoint, and that's it. So spend some 5 minutes on this section. List down all the important APIs. You don't need to go very deep into all the APIs. Just list down the APIs. If you find 10 important operations, if there is an endpoint for sending messages, then you might need to mention about get, put, post, delete, update, or so on of that endpoint. So list down all of the APIs. Don't talk about each API in detail, but just mention about the list, mention about the endpoint. Explain one of the APIs in detail. In detail, as in, don't take 10 minutes to explain it, but just 3 minutes to explain uh, about what would the UR parameters be, what would be the request body. If you can quickly talk about the authentication mode or authorization mode, that would be a great plus point that you can get. Then you can talk about successful responses and the unsuccessful responses. So in step three, we need to talk about the high level design, and we need to discuss it. And this is the most critical section of a system design interview. If you don't do well, if you do well in the other parts but you don't do well in this part, you're not going to get selected. So it's very important, and the expectation out of this step is that you create a diagram. So do some practice over using some diagram tool, whether draw.io or Excalidraw. There are multiple drawing tools out there. They are free of cost. Just practice on them, because if you don't practice, you'll not be able to create a good diagram in 5 minutes there, because you need to have 5-10 minutes over there to create the diagram and talk about that in parallel. Talk about all the requests that are being sent, and what are all the components, how the components are interacting amongst each other, if there is any sharding involved, where is the database, where is the cache. So all of it, you definitely need to have practice over creating a diagram. If you do well in this section, you'll be having an edge. So these are the components that usually a system design diagram consists of. We need to talk about the clients, if there are, if your application using a mobile device or a laptop or a website, everything you need to talk about. You need to talk about what all clients it would be having. Then, if it contains some static data, you also need to have to talk about CDN. um, then of course, because we'll be asked to design an application on scale, so there would be an involvement of load balancer, not at just level. Load balancer is actually involved at multiple places. It can be involved before a database, because we have multiple database shards. A load balancer would be used there. Load balancer would be used just before we are hitting the backend from the front end. So there's a front end backend API which is controlled by the load balancer. Load balancer can sometimes be also called as app gateway or API gateway. So that is like a component that we get. Um, and for multiple microservices also, we have a load balancer before that, because if we have a microservice, it runs on multiple pods, so we need a load balancer before it to be able to balance a load across those pods. So you need to talk about load balancer. Then it's application server. So whatever application we have, it would be having multiple servers. We need to talk about that. This would be the main application server. You can consider as to be the main server that you hit when you're hitting the API from the front end. So the first server that receives a request, where like if it's WhatsApp application, so one there would be one server which is receiving every request from the front end, and then we would be dividing it into like user service, authentication service, and so on. So that would be the application server. And further, if we have microservices, we mention the different microservices. Like if there's some payment service, we talk about that, notification service, user service, messaging service, and so on. Now, a lot of design would also involve some queues. They would be involving some asynchronous communication, in which the request does not get handled there itself, but we have to send some messages which get that, and the task get executed after some time. So in those cases, we use queues. Or and these can have multiple names based on whatever technology you are using. We can call them message broker, message queues, or if you are using cloud tools, you may use a service bus, and so on. The next section would be a database or a cache. So if you, in most cases, you'll be involving with data. So you'll be persisting data, so you will be talking about databases. And if you want to make it more performant, then you'll be also involving caching at some level. So where you involve caching and how you involve caching, how you maintain a consistency between the database and the caches, how you maintain consistency between multiple database components, are the important points that you need to touch in your system design interview round. So this is a sample diagram of a high level design which we need to create. We don't need to add these many colors. That's just for the purpose of video. But a good system design would involve a neat diagram where we have mentioned like multiple clients. What we have, they are sending requests to a load balancer. They are sending a request to a server, but the load balancer is the first component that is facing all the web requests. So the request reaches the load balancer, and from the load balancer it reaches the app server. And app server is not just one, because we are operating on a larger scale, so we have multiple app servers. So there are three different servers are being shown. Now, like as I mentioned, that we might involve different microservices. So for we are connecting with an authentication service over here, which contains auth servers. So all the requests are getting directed to here. We have multiple servers for authentication here. Once we get the request back, there might be some data storage involved. So these are the multiple database shards. Now, if you could see, there is a master database. There are two shards actually, shard 1, shard 2, and both are master. And for every shard, we have one master shard and two slave shards. So these are like concepts. I'm not going into very detail of this because this video is for the purpose of just template. But these are all the things that you need to talk about in your system design interview. Now, if you can see here, also we have a CDN also for all the static data. Talk about that. You save the data in a CDN and it gets returned from there. So that was all those that was about the high level design section part. That was step 3. Now step 4, which is the final part, which usually people ignore, but it also plays an important role in the system design interview round, which is the observability, the monitoring, and the telemetry part. These are the different names. Usually we call it telemetry. So this is how you would be monitoring your application, because if you have a large application, you cannot be uh, uh, sitting on that. And you'll be able to watch it across all that is happening, and if some issue happens, you need to have proper tools installed into your system, into your entire system design, from where you are able to debug it later. Or if there is some, if after a new deployment there is some problem happening, so you should have the measures, the tools that is able to capture those. So you can talk about logging, how logs would be captured, at what level logs would be captured. So you can talk about that logs would be captured at a service level, and it can be captured at an infrastructure level, the different components that we have, like database, caches, and application server. So application server can have logs, and they can be audit logs, which capture all the activities that are happening over the um, components. Then they can be API logs. So every API that is hit, that can be logged. So that would be a logging part of the telemetry. The second would be metrics. Metrics would be how you are measuring the current state of all the components involved. So it could be like the throughput, how many requests are being handled at a particular time unit, how many parallel requests are being handled, how many events or messages are being involved, if there is a queue uh, involved in your system. Then you also need to capture the latency, because sometimes it may happen that because of network glitch or some issue that is happening on any dependent server, you might face high latency. So you might want to do something at that point of time, so you need to monitor the latency of multiple web requests that are happening over your application. Then another point to note and monitor would be the memory consumed. So memory consumed by the runtime engine that are being operated. So based on whichever technology you are using, maybe you are using Java, so you have the JRE, which you need to monitor. If you're using some other language, they would be having their own running engine, so you need to monitor the memory consumed and also the CPU utilization. So these are important metrics that you need to monitor across the different pods that you have, or whatever the components that you are using. So if you're using queues, you need to monitor that also. And apart from that, there would be storage also that would be monitored. So if you are using databases and you expect your application to grow over the years, so you would want to keep a check on how much storage is getting consumed and what is the current state. If you need to reshard, if you need to add multiple more shards in future, because there's a lot of traffic coming in because your application is growing. So all of that you need to monitor. So all in all, these were all the points that we need to talk about in a system design interview round. And it may look overwhelming, but just a little bit of practice, you'll be able to perform really well in this section. So yeah, that's it for this video. I hope I could explain this well and you got to learn something from this video. If you did, do let me know in the comment section below. Okay, then we'll meet in the next video. Thank you.